Hi, welcome to Displacer Geeks. My name is Brian.
And I'm Hudson, and we're two geeks talking about the geek.
That's right. And today's topic is how do you set up your game session?
I just want to point out I like to use crayons when I set up my session. I'm kidding.
Hey, you use whatever works. You can see that I like to use paper and pen still. Even though actually I do a lot of Google Docs too, but I like having the piece of paper in front of me. But we'll go through what we do for our sessions. And Hudson and I are going to have different ways of going about it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It can be super detailed or it can be super not detailed. And I bet you're going to find that both work in different ways. First off, typically when I try to create a session, I always think 4 hours because I feel like that's pretty standard in the gaming industry is you play a RPG session for about 4 hours. You agree with that, Hudson?
I would say that that is a very common number that you'll run across.
Yeah. So when I start figuring out what to do, the very first thing I think of is what is my end goal for that particular session? Am I specifically just wanting to have them fight some cool monster I made? Are they supposed to discover something about their storyline? Am I supposed to heavily progress the story? Am I going to theme the session over one character's story? Just a lot of things like that. Will there be a big boss fight? Well, they'll be introduced to a new villain. Keep that in mind, I think. What do you think about that, Hudson?
No, those are all good things. To me, like if it's a campaign, like, okay, is there any big campaign reveals going to happen tonight? Like, is
Yeah.
ideal, is that going to happen? How many fights do I want to have? Like, period. Usually you want it for your sanity, try to keep it to one, but like, how do you make that fight relevant? Uh,
Yeah. And that's kind of an interesting point too, because it depends on the people in the group. I personally like every session kind of matter towards the campaign. Now, the one that I'm running right now is on a podcast, so it's very different. So I feel like everything has to make sure it's relevant,
right.
because it's kind of like a TV show in a way. But in regular gaming sessions, it's still fun to do that. But I would say it's more open to be open on most people's regular gaming sessions, if that made sense at all.
Sure. And that it's not to say that a random encounter can't be relevant. It's just
Yeah.
how do you tie it in to make it relevant, right? Did the players pick a bad spot for camping and did they get ambushed by something?
Yeah.
So like technically just a random encounter, but was it relevant? Could the players have done something about it? Did it impact the story in a way? Potentially, you know. And sometimes it's okay to let the players, some players are combat junkies. Like you got to give them the
Yes.
combat.
Yep. That's true. So when I lay out a session, again, I think 4 hours. And then I think, what's my end goal for the session? Even though my end goal, I always think, well, this is what I'm thinking, but the night could easily go this way, and it could also go this way. So I'll write that at the bottom of my little note sheet, and then I bullet point a few things that I think would happen or things that I think should be relevant. I kind of go from there, and depending on the night, sometimes I have a lot of bullet points and then sometimes I don't. But I also sometimes have a lot of information that they could find out, and I put them as bullet points. And then if they find them, I check them off so I can always go back. And if they don't find them, no biggie. But I try to prepare myself for that when it comes to storyline discovery and stuff like that. But boy, when you plan for A, your party's always going to do B, C, D, E, and F first.
Yeah. Yep. I definitely was trying to do a campaign where I was letting the players' actions matter a little bit more. So I was like giving them information and then just letting them do whatever with it. But sometimes they just weren't taking the hooks.
Yeah.
And I found that a lot of times I was like, okay, that hook didn't really do what I wanted it to, but I need it to happen. So I remember thinking like, okay, how do I get them back around to this hook again and actually get them to follow it? Like, how do I make it almost mandatory that they follow it? But yeah, no, like you start out with this is the information they can find, and then you try to like plan out one or two fights, make sure that the fights are fun, and they don't always have to be like super impactful, but like make sure that it's fun and like there's some sort of random challenge thing to it. Whether it's just a super hard fight or one time I gave the players the goal of capturing a cockatrice alive in a library.
Yeah, that stuff's fun. Super fun.
The library had two floors, and but the floor was kind of like open in the middle.
Hmm.
And so like they could like jump across the bookshelves, and the
Oh,
cockatrice was like
yeah.
going up and down the floors in the middle of this library. At first, they were like running up and down the stairs, and then somebody was just like, "I'm going across the bookshelves."
And I bet it made for an amazing night.
Your brother played in it, and he commented on it one
Awesome.
time, so
Awesome.
it was at least slightly memorable. So
That's
yeah,
great. It's funny you say that because I have a very memorable moment for running a session, and it happened in a library. So, or I was planning a session. We were playing Earth Dawn. You'll remember this when I get to it. But for that particular session, I said, okay, well, they're gonna go to like this grand library. Okay, they call it the Great Library. I'm like, it'd be kind of fun to give John's character a chance to get framed. And I'm like, I'm gonna see if it happens. And
I wasn't there, by the way. I wasn't there that night.
you missed that night. Oh my God.
Yeah, I
Okay.
wasn't there that night, but
So
I definitively remember that the fallout.
yeah. So I decided that a thief windling, like a sprite character, little flying character, was gonna fly by John's character, who was also a windling, and she kind of winks at him and flicks him a coin and heads out of the library. And then soon enough, a bunch of guards pour out of a room and they're looking for a windling with a coin. And they go to him. And what does he do? In John fashion, instead of saying, I don't know, this windling just flicked this coin at me, he decides to hide it. So they detain him, find the coin, and then they think he's the one who stole it. And then it just like became a complete major mess. And it was the best thing ever. But that night I had just a few bullet points on some things, and we didn't get to a lot of them because John ended up getting arrested and all that. And I thought maybe it would happen, but so great.
Maybe I feel
I
like you
well,
do. I feel like you do.
I mean, you kind of know your players after you play with them for like 30 years, but it was funny though. It was so funny.
That
It's like, why
was
why did he just not say he didn't do it? Give it up.
John. Sometimes you can figure like kind of like pull like find a way to pull the information out. There's I've met another player that's just an absolute black hole, and you got to plan around those things. Like, okay, we're gonna give this person a flat point. If you have a black hole player, and when I say black hole, like the information goes to them and then stops. They are
They
a
don't
black
share.
hole. They don't share. They
Got it.
don't do things. You should be able to plan around that, right? Like you're like, okay, that information is going to go nowhere. Like, does this information need to get out? How do I make it get out?
Yeah, that's a good point. You want to know your characters because you should also keep that in mind. And I feel like I do to an extent. I mean, you kind of forget sometimes to cover for everybody, but you try to go, okay, I think I want this to happen tonight. This is like the main theme of the night. What would John's guy do? What would Hudson's guy do? Will the actual players have fun? And you kind of go from there. You can't make everybody happy at all times, obviously. But if you have somebody that is a combat junkie and you don't do combat for a very long time, they're eventually gonna get a little frustrated. Naturally, it's not like they
Mhm.
might be like mad
Yeah.
at you or anything. But then on the flip side of that too, if you get a person that wants to role play nonstop and you don't do much role playing at all, then you start to kind of get that person a little upset too. Again, you should be friends with all your gamer buddies, I would think. So it's not like I would think that your friendships are going to end or anything, but keep that in mind. Another thing, when it comes to divvying out treasure and stuff too, that can be a little tricky because you don't want to accidentally give one person all the magical items.
Yep.
And when you think you'll give out a item and they'll figure it all out, it can kind of be a mess. And you might do that like 3 or 4 times, and somehow the one person always gets all the items for whatever reason. So just keep that in
Yeah.
mind too. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but Sometimes
Yeah.
people are like, why is he getting all the items? Like, I don't know. You guys gave it to him.
There is definitely times when I've seen DMs like plot out who's supposed to get what item. And then like they kind of have to almost interfere with what the players are doing.
Oh, because everything's so rigid and plotted out.
Not necessarily,
That
but
would
because
come up.
like some of the players are just greedy. I don't really have a good word
Yeah,
for it, right?
there's some
Like
greedy
they're like,
players out there.
but some of the items are just good for like lots of different players.
Yeah.
And they're like they're making a case why it is a good item for their character,
Hmm.
which is valid, right? To a
Yeah.
degree. But I've literally have seen cases where the DM had to be like, what about this guy? This guy doesn't really have that much. Maybe you should give it to that guy.
I've seen that happen before in the past too, where I have said like, "Hey guys, this one was actually meant for Hudson's character, but if you guys, if you guys want to divvy it up, or if he doesn't want it, that's fine." But
Right.
definitely keep that in mind when you're getting magical
Yeah.
items out and stuff.
Yeah. One of the my favorite handouts was I was doing random loot. I was just like, I would have them roll on the random charts that were in the DM.
Yeah,
And they
it's
rolled a
fun.
+2 weapon. Really early, by the way.
Yeah,
Like they were
that's
like,
awesome.
I don't even know if they were level 5.
So yeah, when you're planning your session, one thing that you definitely want to do is just always make sure you're ready to make adjustments because again, you can plan all you want and make 8,000 little bullet points, and your players might avoid every single one of them.
One time, I did this once. I don't recommend it. One time, I plotted out a module and I used military planning. Boy, did I catch a lot of freaking wild scenarios doing that. It was very time consuming. That's why I don't recommend it. So, military says 1/3, 2/3. So, if it's going to take 4 hours, it should only take you 2 hours to plan out the session. And if you start doing military planning, you can come up with some pretty wild scenarios. I think I had like 7 different encounters based on what the player characters did at one
Oh,
point.
yeah, yeah,
And I was just like, it turns out you need, I, the last time I ran that module, I had 3.
yeah.
But
Three's pretty
the
good.
reason I had 3 was I gave them hooks. Each
Yeah,
one of those had a hook. And theoretically, if the characters could have just walked away, right? And if they walked
yeah,
away, I'd be like, well, we're going to do this one. But like, I only planned that encounter out once because they didn't walk away. They've never walked away
yeah.
because you got those hooks. You're like reeling
Mm-hmm.
them in.
Yeah,
And I kind of had to lean a little heavier towards the one hook because I wanted the last time I really wanted them to get the best possible ending. But they were kind of being a little indecisive too, so I kept pushing on that one a little bit more
yeah,
and try to get them towards it. Just nothing else, make a decision.
yeah.
So
Sometimes players can be completely indecisive and the session can drag on. So, as a
oh,
DM, kind of push them a little bit if you need
ah,
to. But don't be a
ah,
rigid GM because if you plan everything out and you're like, nope, everything has to happen like this, eventually the players are going to feel like they're actually not playing a game, they're playing your game. And that is a negative experience for a lot of people. So, always just be ready to adjust and modify.
also, don't be afraid to push them. There's times when they're just going to be like stuck. They're going, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Give them something to do.
Well, and also you may have given them 8 hooks and they still can't figure it out. You're like, "Oh, okay, let me try this again."
I mean, you could recap information with them at that time. You could
Yeah.
have them there's a number of
Or
things you can do, but,
make them do
or
a,
just give them another hook. Maybe that
or,
one will set.
or make them do a perception check and let them know that their character remembers something. That's one way to keep things going too. Yeah, I've been on both ends of planning out like crazy and not planning at all, but I still probably have the end goal kind of in mind, at least for what I think I want to have happen that night. And you can have fun with both for sure. I am like you though, that 3 thing, I do go back to that quite a bit. So if I say, man, I think I want these guys to go do X, you kind of know your players after a while, especially if you've been playing with them for a long, long time. You kind of know, try to get them to do X. I feel like, this player's character might lean this way and this character's might go that way and, based on their story and stuff like that. So just kind of be prepared with that. But, and not that I have to write all of those down, but having thought about it a little bit before you plan your session or play your session is not a bad idea. I think it's pretty fun, actually. I like sitting around and writing up my little notes and stuff and kind of getting some ideas. And
I remember one time I couldn't think of anything. I couldn't think of anything. Couldn't think of anything. So it was like game night. I was like, I don't know what we're gonna do. And your brother shows up. It's like, I want to go do a quest to become a bear barbarian. Okay.
yep,
That's
you're
what we're
like,
doing.
sweet, sweet.
I was just so stumped that night. I just couldn't think of anything.
And that does happen. That does happen. If you're running a game every week, that sometimes can catch up with you where you get writer's block. But like you said, one of the best things to do is just show up, have the character start the little story out, and just see what they do. Throw something in at them. One thing I actually like to do a lot is when characters are in a tavern. I have like a list of rumors written down, and it's fun to be like, oh yeah, you've heard that there's been some werewolf sightings, up north, and then you hear this, and there's bandits to the west. That way, players might be like, ooh, I want to go check out the werewolves, and now
Hmm.
all of a sudden, you just start running with it and have them go investigate werewolves, which is a fun way to do that. Feeding them little things, and then they
Yeah.
decide what to do with it.
I've always heard like try to have like 5 challenges, and they don't have to be. And when I say challenges, we don't mean combat. Like, hey, you heard about the rumor, right? So now you got your hook. They're checking out the werewolves,
Yeah,
right? So the first challenge is finding anybody that has any finding that guy that had the information about it.
yeah,
Second, like the second challenge could be like getting the information out of them,
yeah.
right?
Fourth challenge could be getting the right equipment if you feel like going to deal with them, with the
Well, I
werewolves.
mean, yes and no, but like just tracking the werewolves could be a
Yeah,
challenge,
tracking the
right?
werewolves. Yep. And maybe you don't have it end that session. Maybe you get to a town and there's some people wiped
Yeah,
out, or there's people being really shifty and mysterious, and it's almost a full moon. You
yeah,
start getting them to think like, wait a minute, are these people werewolves? Are these people part of it? Or you go there and
yeah,
there's missing kids, and you find out the werewolves have taken some of the kids, or however you want to do it.
yeah. Or you go to town and it's not werewolves, it's werelions, and you just
Mhm.
walked into a whole pack war.
Where what?
Lions?
Oh, lions. Yeah, so there you go. You could do all sorts of things like that.
Yeah,
You could have them go to a town and it's like a Willy Wonka chocolate factory. You can do whatever you want.
yeah. Well,
You're
one
shaking your
time,
head. Oh,
yeah, I'm just laughing. I'm like, really well chicken for is a little ridiculous. But one time I went to a town for a cooking festival,
yeah.
and the guy that was the mayor would invite you up to his castle, and then he would eat you. If you won the
Nice.
cooking competition, you would go visit him in his castle and he'd eat you. I ripped his toenail off.
Nice.
He was a
Uh,
giant. I was a halfling. It felt appropriate in the
yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
I think if you're new to it, I would start out with a little bit more planning because it's easier to dial back on the planning than it is to like, oh, I need to plan more. I need to plan more. Um,
True.
and then, but the thing is I think I would try to keep it to like the 1/3, 2/3 rule that the military has. Like, this shouldn't take you 6 hours to plan out a session for them to play for 4 hours. Like,
Yeah.
that's you got things to do. Like, yeah, maybe you got a little bit more work than the players, but like you got a life, you got a job. There's other things to be doing. You got pizza and ice cream you want to eat. You know, the point is you got a life beyond beyond running that game, right? So yeah, try to keep it to a couple hours. It's not a hard and fast rule, right? If it takes longer because you're reading a module, and then you got to figure out like how that module interacts with this map, and then like reread it a couple times, that's a little different, right? And it
Yeah.
should be fun. If you're stressing yourself out and losing hair over this, you need to figure out a different way, or maybe
Yeah.
not do it.
Yeah. One of the things that I would say that you can do just prepping your session though too is having a handful. Those monster cards I think are really fun. And I always carry a sheet or two with all the inserted monsters or even NPC stats that I could just pull out at any time during our sessions. And that's pretty fun.
I have definitely found stats for a monster that I didn't have like a monster card to and just like wrote it down on a 3x5 card.
Yeah,
But yeah, the internet's
absolutely.
your friend. You can find anything.
You can find a character stat block for anything. Yeah,
Yep. You're like, I need
totally.
a stat block. Hey, we talked about making up stat blocks for miniatures that we thought they looked cool, but like in another video. I don't know why that word was so hard. Uh, but in another video, we were talking about that. Like, you don't actually have to do that. Like, you could just look it up. Like, I mean, making up the stats is fun, especially those monsters. They were super fun. You should check that video out.
You should. You can use your phone and behind the DM screen, you can have a monster on your phone. They also have loot generators and stuff that you can download on your phone for free as well, by the way. Like lots of stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that's free. Just an FYI if you are new to the game. So, and that are
Free is
almost
good.
word for word, if not word for the actual rules. One thing that I like to do too, now that I think about it, is when I get my basic layout done for what I think my next session's going to be, then I start thinking of details. So let's just say it's a quick dungeon crawl. Well, okay, I want them to have these monsters. Here's the boss monster at the end. Have a few traps in there. Well, when I get done, then I go back and go, okay, what kind of traps? Ooh, can I add something unique in this room? Can I add something unique in this room? Or what piece of the story can I include in here? Or what can they learn about the world in here? Even if it's not a dungeon crawl, you could do that with anything. Like, hey, these people are going to this town now, and they're going to go talk to the king. Beautiful. That's kind of the whole story. So I'm sure they'll stop into a tavern so I can get some details on that. I'm sure they're going to look at some magical items at a shop. But then you could sit there and add more details in later of anything really, whether it's super impactful or important or just for fun. That's something I like to do a lot with my session layouts as well.
Now, there's a lot of neat little tricks you can do to keep it going. And, another thing, if the players want to role play, just let them. Like,
Yeah,
sometimes they'll do something, they'll come up with an idea or come up with something crazy or do an interaction. And that's just really a lot of fun that you didn't plan.
having them interact with the NPCs can actually open up stories big time or open up plot hooks or open up anything. Hopefully, your players realize too that the more they open up, the more dynamic the story gets too. If
Yeah,
you do have a lot of characters that are very sealed lips, then have some NPCs that interact with them that are very talkative and try to get them to open up a bit because yeah, players staying quiet will not help the story a whole lot at times. But to each their own too. Some people just are not comfortable with doing that. So
sure. Sometimes it can be detrimental. So you got to be
yes.
careful of that black hole. It's kind of funny to a point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with that being said, keep in mind, try to make things fun for your players. Don't stress out too much and try to have an end goal for the session, but always remember that end goal might go that way, that way, that way, that way, or that way. Most likely it's not going to go the way you thought it would.
Yep. And be okay with that because it's going to make the players feel like they had an impact on the story. And that's the purpose of this game, or purpose, not the porpoise. The purpose of role playing games is to tell a story with everybody being involved and interactive.
Yes, and it's fun all the time. I mean, if you're gaming with your friends, it's going to be fun pretty much all the time. So hopefully. Well, with that being said, thanks for watching, like and subscribe. And again, make sure you're having fun while you're gaming. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.